You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Disney presents the Black Cauldron of Notre Dame. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. And I am Adam Thomas, and I am very, very boring, and it's just not good.
Great way to sell the show. And I am Thomas Mariani. Here, I am the result of several different studio notes from Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. I'm a terrible mess, basically. But, Adam, we're not the only people here. In fact, you're not the only Adam here in this room, which is a shocker.
Yeah, I
the
don't
first time in about 150 episodes, we have a second Adam on the show. He is the co-host of a few podcasts, including the Zillennial Canon podcast. He is Mr. Adam Sirdoreus. Adam, welcome.
Thank you, man. It's an honor to be on here. I kind of went down a binger of your pod this past week, so now it's kind of almost surreal being a guest on here.
You're a bit starstruck, but this happens a lot. We get it all the time. For all our dozens of listeners that show up on the show eventually.
Oh, yeah. Constantly. I get literally tens of emails a month.
And I also want to say this one feels very fitting because these two movies, I feel like, because on my other podcast, Zillennial Canon, we try to cover like mid-2000s movies, and neither of these quite fit that range, but they're both movies that I always want to talk about when it comes to, like, I don't know, the weirdness of the productions and everything. So I'm very excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm very curious because we definitely have a varying age ranges here. Because I know Adam would be considered, I believe, an older millennial. I'm a younger millennial. You're one of those Zillennial kids. The kids on the TikToks that are going to save us, right? You're going to save us? Save us? Please save us.
You know what? I'm trying my darndest.
One-man crusade. But, by the way, for the sake of the show, given, once again, the first time we've ever had a second Adam, we're going to be referring to our guest as Adam 2, which was your suggestion.
Yeah, it's not something they, like, bestowed upon me upon entering the call. Like, I consulted with them beforehand. I'm like, hey, look, my supervisor at work is named Adam, and that's what they just called me around work. So I'm just used to it. I'm used to being in second place in life.
I wanted to be called Your Majesty, but no, fuck me, right? Yeah.
That's true. You're just the OG Adam, the original, not to be duplicated.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about something we've discussed before on the show in terms of Disney films. It's kind of unavoidable to some extent to talk about Disney if you're talking about movies on a podcast at this point. But we're specifically going to be talking about 2 films from the Walt Disney Animated Features canon because we are recording this around the time that Raya and the Last Dragon is out, which is currently on Disney Plus with the premiere access thing. And Adam, too, I believe you actually watched it, right?
Yes, I randomly went to a 8:45 showing last night in a completely empty theater, just like on a whim. Not to go into like a giant review of it, but I loved it. It's the best Disney movie I've seen. I want to say since like Big Hero 6, maybe.
That's high praise. I'm excited to see it, man. It looks really fun. It looks interesting. It's got a really cool cultural aspect to it that I'm completely unaware of, and that's always what makes those exciting.
I'm a big fan of games like Tomb Raider and Uncharted and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I can honestly say this movie does like Tomb Raider more justice than any of the Tomb Raider adaptations ever have. It's a great adventure movie, great action movie, but also has a lot to say about unity and people and trust, and it's a beautiful movie. So before we talk about like a good classic and a bad just trip down memory lane, definitely see Raya and the Last Dragon, because it's really, really great.
Well, I definitely will, though. Is it worth the $30 Premier Access is the question.
Well, okay, so I went to a kind of rundown theater here where I only paid $7 to see it on the big screen. So I would say it's worth seeing it for $7 if you're in a safe location with nobody in it. I don't know if any movie is really worth $30.
No, not if you don't own it. It's going to be free for everybody like June 2nd.
I'm pretty anti Disney Premier Access. I'm not anti-streaming per se, but anti-$30 on top of an already subscription-based service is very strange to me. So I can't quite recommend that. But however you choose you want to see the movie, I highly recommend everyone to go see the movie, because it's just really damn good.
Right, and I assume especially if you're going to a theater, see it safely, like I'm sure Adam too did.
Yeah, I masked up. I saw it. Like I said, that I was the only one in the theater last night. So
yeah, very safe, about as safe as you could be.
So clearly you're a big fan of the Walt Disney stuff in general, and that's, I'm guessing, why you decided to come on for our animated features canon. So given you're younger, I guess, what was sort of more of your entry point for that?
I think kind of the story of how I got into film in general at a young age was my grandpa. He used to, every Friday, he would go to like the local pawn shop and he would buy me like 2 or 3 VHS tapes of Disney movies just randomly. He didn't even know if I already had them. He would just buy them. So I think the first ones he ever bought me was like Toy Story. And this was before Toy Story 2 came out. So he bought me Toy Story, Lion King, and Little Mermaid. Those were the first 3 I ever owned. I just kind of watched them on repeat. And it got to the point where the VHS tape just kind of like got tired and burnt out. We had to go buy new copies. So yeah, those were like my 3 core ones, but I think the Toy Story franchise as a whole too, like even deeper than just Toy Story 1 and 2, like the Buzz Lightyear animated series, Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. Like, so I had a Buzz Lightyear themed room when I was a kid.
You were just Andy?
Yeah, I was literally Andy. Like I literally like wrote Adam at the bottom of their feet, like Andy did in the movie. Like I like my toys. Like my childhood with Disney goes so incredibly deep.
I guess I have a similar thing in terms of, like, I remember the clamshell VHSs, and especially with sort of the main focus of today being the animated features canon, which, if you don't know, listeners, is basically any of the movies produced by their official studio, ranging from Snow White to Raya and the Last Dragon as of recent. So it's a total of, it's 59, right, is Raya and the Last Dragon? It's the 59th film that they've done. Yes.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, yes. I actually did a ranking on Letterboxd today, and I was surprised at how many I've actually seen. Like, some of them I forgot were, like, I know you watched it recently, I think, right, Thomas? Home on the Range. Like, it wasn't until I went on the Wikipedia page, and I just was like, oh, that movie exists, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was one of the only 2 I hadn't seen, was that, and one of the subjects for today. Because I avoided them for obvious reasons, which we'll get into, especially with the other one. But yeah, it's weird, especially how sort of you can track literally the history of animation through that entire spectrum of movies, going from the first feature-length one of Snow White all the way through like the rise and fall of like digital animation, even like with combining with 2D, and then eventually getting to 3D animation and all this other stuff. It's an interesting history you can go through for sure with that. And I'm assuming, Adam, what you watched Snow White in the theater when it came out originally, right? That's how you discovered all this?
Watched it. I was the operator of the camera.
One of the 9 old men is here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep. When I was younger, when I was just a tyke, Disney's Robin Hood and Sword in the Stone were my favorites. I absolutely loved them. I still love Robin Hood to this day because of Prince John. But the first one that I saw in the theater that I still have cognizant memory of that blew my fucking mind was Little Mermaid. And ever since then, I mean, you got to figure what a stellar couple of years. I mean, actually still continuing for the most part, except like Home on the Range and Brother Bear and things like that. But yeah, Little Mermaid was probably the first one where I was like, oh, this is a Disney movie. Yeah, I'm absolutely in love with the Disney canon films. I think they're phenomenal. I mean, some of my favorite movies of the last couple of years have been Disney animated films, like Moana and Princess of the Frog and things. I just think they're just fantastic films. And for the most part, they produce just masterpieces.
Yes, for the most part they do. And it's interesting you mentioned like The Little Mermaid because that sort of kicks off the Disney Renaissance, which we're covering two films I would argue kind of bookend that period.
Yes.
Because we're going to be talking about two movies. If you don't know the format, folks, at the end of every episode, we pick a good and a bad feature based randomly on a couple choices that Adam and I have. And for the bad pick, we had one that Adam, as well as our patrons over at patreon.com/DEDBpod, chose of The Black Cauldron, which was in 1985 and was sort of like the low point for Disney at a certain point before the Renaissance happened. And then we'll be talking about my good pick, which was The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I would argue kind of ends that Renaissance period, though some argue that's maybe Tarzan or some other things. If anything, it's near the end, maybe the beginning of the end of that, if nothing else.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
But let's go ahead and jump into The Black Cauldron.
Legend has it, there was once a king so cruel and so evil that the gods feared him. Since no prison could hold him, he was trapped forever in the form of a great black cauldron. Escape into a world of darkness.
Are you coming?
Oh, no. It's a terrible place.
Soon the black cauldron will be mine. In the great tradition of Disney animated classics, now comes the newest Disney spectacle of them all, The Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron came out July 26, 1985. As we mentioned, was sort of like a really infamous disaster, quite frankly, for Disney. Because this is... I'll be as brief as I possibly can, though Adam, too, can agree that there is a wealth of information about sort of this post-Walt Disney dying period of Disney, leading into the Renaissance, where it's just like all the weird sort of stuff of like people desperately trying to cling on to like what would Walt would have done, how can we kind of do that. Like Ron Miller was the lead of the studio at the time. It's crazy in terms of like how weird the whole history of this particular period is for Disney.
Yeah, I was kind of I can't remember what specific like video essay thing I was watching the other day. I want to plug the channel, but I can't remember. But they were specifically talking about like how bad an idea it was to cling onto Walt's old ideas opposed to like going about finding new things to adapt. And the Black Cauldron was definitely the worst example of that, I think. Just something completely outdated and doesn't really... I don't want to say it doesn't fit the mold of what a Disney movie should be, because the potential is certainly there, but the execution and the messiness of the production is just entirely visible the entire time. And I've always known about this movie just from being a Disney nerd, but I never thought I would actually watch it. So when you guys invited me on, I was like, oh, this is the perfect opportunity to like watch this movie, because it seems like something I would have never seen if this had not happened.
Brief primer, folks. Walt Disney himself dies in like 1966, and thus the studio is put into a weird turmoil. The last movie he worked on was Jungle Book. So from there, you had various movies in the 70s and first half of the 80s that were very cheap, and some are more well-liked than others, but none of them... Well, they all sort of seemed inferior to what the history of Disney was before this. And The Black Cauldron was sort of the culmination of a lot of the younger animators coming in, because the 9 old men who I referenced earlier were like the guys who had worked with Walt from the beginning. Most of them had retired by like, I believe Fox and the Hound was the last one where some of them were still around, which was the one right before this. And so The Black Cauldron was the first big movie for all of those animators to come in on. This most expensive animated movie of all time at that point, at $44 million. It only made about $21 million at the time. It was a huge disaster, to the point where around the same time, two people, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, had just entered the company, like, near the tail end of this movie's production, and had, like, edited stuff, and were really, like, displeased with the movie, to the point where they were almost hell-bent on, like, just shutting down their animated feature production in general, and just being like, oh, we can just re-release the old ones, focus on the theme parks, and, like, some live-action stuff we can do. Animation seems dead at this point. But then, right after this, you had, like, Great Mouse Detective, which did decently well, and Oliver and Company that did decently well, and then ultimately The Little Mermaid, as I mentioned, was pretty beloved and successful, leading to the Renaissance and leading to Disney's ultimate sort of corporate takeover that's been happening for the rest of time as of yet. So, that is all the preamble, really. And unfortunately, it's most of the interesting stuff about this movie. Because it's kind of fucking dull. And I get why no one really cared to re-release it. Because you would want this to be one of those things, right, where it's like, oh, it's the lost gem. You hear especially, it's the darkest Disney movie ever. It's the first PG-rated one. It's like, oh my god, there's so much, like, controversy and infamy to it. And then you watch it, and some of that stuff is there, but then ultimately, it's just, like, a really dull fantasy story that you don't give a shit about.
Yeah, I consider myself, I don't want to say a Disney purist, but I'm almost like, I love Disney obscurities so much. Like, I find, like, even, like, in the theme parks, like, that of, like, Disney Quest, or, like, their failed attempts at, like, starting, like, chain restaurants across America. Like, I find all that, like, those relics of Disney to be so fascinating. And I'm also, like, some of my favorite Disney movies are, like, Treasure Planet or Atlantis, like, movies that didn't do particularly well at the time. So going into this, I was like, yeah, I'm ready to, like, you know, just be the only fan of the Black Cauldron. And I kind of just left bored by the end. Like, I couldn't tell you the characters' names right now.
One of them was like falafel or something. I remember that.
Princess Alonwe, Terran, like, they're just really, like, weird fancy names that don't stick in your head enough.
All right. I was quiet enough because I know what's going to happen with this movie. I'm going to be a ball of rage. It's just a shitty version of Lord of the Rings, to the point where the little fucking Geppetto mustached dog is just Gollum. He sounds exactly like him.
Literally exactly like him.
I mean, literally exactly. B, dude, the Horned King is one of the laziest motherfuckers I've ever seen. Right? Like, that dude doesn't do shit in this movie. He sits on a fucking chair the whole time. Where is your organization, dude? You're supposed to be this great villain. Your prison has no guards. They escape and go from room to room with ease. You have a beautiful, magical, enchanting sword likened to Excalibur or fucking Nazgul or whatever from Lord of the Rings buried under your prison, and you have no idea it's there? You are worthless.
He knows he has the John Hurt voice, and he just thinks, like, I could just really ride on that.
Yeah,
wow.
Fuck it, this is what we do. You have, like, Green Goblin, if he got shrunk by a ray with one eye, as the comedic relief. And he's so fucking dumb and annoying. Pig Boy, as he's referenced, which it just fucking killed me, the whole movie. Because every time they said it, I'm like, yeah, that's right, that is him.
I do insist we call him Pig Boy for the rest of the time we talk about the Black Cauldron.
Yeah, all right, yeah, no, that's fine. So Pig Boy finds this magic sword. He instantly trips and drops it. Then he does dick with it. How about instead of blocking a hand axe, you stab a guy? No, he stabs, for some reason, pressurized wood barrels of wine that when he stabs him, the wine shoots out like a rocket. And for some reason, again, the most inept prison guards of all time cannot walk on something wet. That stops them. And what is the Horned King, the main villain, doing of all time?
He's chilling.
When the green guy comes in and tells him, oh, they got away. It looks like he's about to go to bed. It looks like he has his bedrobe on. Like, what the fuck? The fairies. Why do they look so shitty compared to everything else in the movie? Like, the character design and the animation looks terrible. It looks like my 5-year-old got a fucking pack of crayons and tried to draw something. Flames, the side of my face. This movie was so ungodly and unbelievably boring to the point where it's at, like 87 minutes, if that. I paused it 8 or 9 times to either bitch about it or just do anything else. I hate it. I hate myself for picking it. I hate that it has a weird, like, fan base because it's terrible.
But we love all our patrons for voting on it. Please continue to be patrons and keep voting for things.
Hey, I'd rather take this than force message Brother Bear.
That's true, that was the alternate pick, and I think it's a lot more of, like, a dull one than this one necessarily is. Because, like, Adam said a lot of things, obviously, just now. Well, yeah, because it's a thing of, like, most of the stuff is just, like, a lot of these characters are so sort of either completely lacking any agency or are just like really annoying attempts to like kind of recreate that Disney style. It's this weird thing where this movie is so in between of like, we want to have that same Disney charm, but also we want to have like some of the spookier things. And like everyone who likes this movie talks about like, oh, like the spookier stuff like near the end of the movie with all like the skeletons and stuff. That stuff's kind of interesting, but it's chopped to shit because they edited the hell out of that stuff. And also, it's so a small part of the movie compared to the lame Lord of the Rings adventure we're on with Gurgi. Worst Disney sidekick ever?
Yes.
Okay,
I
good.
hated him. I hated that sidekick. Like, what is he exactly?
Yeah, right. It has a human face, dog body, yet 3 fingers on each hand. What the fuck? I understand it's a fantasy movie, but the best fantasy is based some on reality. Even the fucking Horn King has a normal skeleton. The fairies, as terrible as they look, still look like little Santa. Gurgi is just this weird fucking thing. It's so dumb. And why does it talk? Why does it talk? And when it talks, why does it sound like that? You know, munches and crunches, master. What the fuck? What? Who?
Hold on, let Adam 2 talk a bit more, Adam. Adam 2,
Sorry,
please
Adam.
continue.
I'm sorry. I'm enraged.
No, it's good. I agree with everything Adam said pretty much, and he brought up a lot of good points, especially with the villain. Very cool looking guy, but like Adam said, nothing to show for it. I couldn't tell you what his motive is. Just completely lifeless, not intimidating at all. Because like when he first appears on screen, I'm like, now that's a Disney villain. Like that's cool. And then nothing. Like radio silence for the rest of the movie. I felt nothing. No tension, no anything. And all the gothic stuff is really cool, but it's not enough to cling on to. Like aesthetics can only get you so far, especially in a Disney movie, because like so much of that is based on the memorable characters, the iconic settings, and the world building. And this movie just doesn't do shit with it. But it makes me sad to like talk shit so much because so much of it is just simply because of the production. Like it's the same weird comparison, but the same thing I have to say about like Joss Whedon's Justice League versus Zack Snyder's Justice League, because it's like it doesn't feel like a real movie made by a person. It feels like a movie made by a studio in crisis, you know?
Mhm.
So it almost it doesn't feel like it's a real movie to critique. It feels like, yeah, this is what happens when corporate meddling gets in the way of people trying to do their jobs, and this is what you get. Because it was in production for over 5 years.
Oh, it was longer. Like they had first like bought the rights to do these books, I think around like some point in the 70s. I believe it was supposed to be released in 1980 even, and then they had like further production stuff. But it's interesting just because like I would definitely recommend. I know Adam too, you saw this as well, the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty, which talks a lot about sort of like the development of like Disney from the production of this movie through to like the end of the Renaissance period, sort of like from this to like Lion King. And they talk a lot about how at this point it was a weird mixture of this stuff that we're talking about, like all the corporate meddling, but also at the same time just a bunch of inexperienced animators kind of left on their own to do whatever with this movie. And I think it's why like the aesthetic stuff, it feels also like a movie made by a bunch of younger animators that are just like, we want to keep, like I said, the Disney vision alive, but also we want to do some edgier stuff. Like we haven't talked about the witches that show up and all the weird like sexual stuff with the witches, particularly when the one guy, the bard, is shrunk into a frog and then he's like in between their boobs. This is so weird. Like I don't get what the point of this is.
Pig Boy is just brunette Arthur from Sword in the Stone. It's the same character design.
But the difference I would say is like I rewatched that recently as well. I rewatched a bunch of these Disney movies on my Letterboxd. The Sword in the Stone isn't one I'd seen in a while, and I'm not the hugest fan of that movie. But at the same time, at least with that Arthur, he feels authentically like a kid, especially because like the actor was actually going through puberty at the time, like breaking up his voice, and that's a lot more interesting and investing.
I'm saying the character design. It looks identical, except he's a brunette.
Right, but there's also not any of that sort of interesting, because that was around the time when, like, Don Bluth was still working with the studio. And it kind of has that rougher, distinctive edge to it that's not, like, the most impressive visually, but at least feels a bit more, like, respectable and a bit more like, okay, there's something to this character, as opposed to Taron feels like the most cleaned-up version possible of that, and it's lacking any kind of edge, weirdly, despite how dark this reputation of this movie is. He's such, like, a bland character design. All the human designs really are.
Yes, the dark reputation of this movie is the last 20 minutes of this movie.
Yeah.
the main character, he doesn't go on any real journey of growth, which I think is kind of essential in any given Disney movie. Like, I would say even in the weakest movies, you can find like some kind of message to take away, like some kind of like, you show a kid a Disney movie with hopes that they take something away from it. But you show a kid this, and I'm like, what do they take away from this? Like, what is the message?
They're going to be bored for an hour and then scared for the last 15 minutes and not watch the rest of it.
The message is, instead of a magic sword that I could do anything with, bring back the shaved Scottish Terrier with a fucking weird voice. Give me that back. This movie is... No, I completely agree with you, Adam, too. God, that's so weird to say. I completely agree with you, Adam, too. There is no message to this movie. There's no great sort of hero sacrifice or sort of learning moment. It's just scene to scene garbage. Like, it's so loose and played with. Like, if anything, because the animation still, let's get on the animation is still kind of good. It's still pretty stellar. Yeah. It looks pretty good.
I mean, especially coming off of like that period of like the 70s and 80s, it looks a lot cleaner than, especially like coming off of Fox and the Hound, which looks really like very shabby.
It's sharp, it's clean, it's pretty stellar looking. Like, especially, the point with the Black Cauldron where it leaks and all, and like, it looks pretty legit. But the story and script really fucking needed at least another pass on it. It's just interconnecting moments of fantasy sort of tropes and stereotypes that, like I said, watching it, you're like, oh, this is just Lord of the Rings, basically. For the most part. It's Lord of the Rings, it's Willow. It's the same story you've seen 1,000 times. It needed another pass. It needed a punch up. It needed something to make it interesting, and it just doesn't have it.
Yeah, I mean, because you could get away with like the no character development thing maybe if the world around him was cool, but it's not. So then when the world around him's not cool, you gotta have the characters, and they're not interesting either. And so it's like, okay, is the plot gonna be good? It's not. So what do you have? You don't have good side characters. There's no music. This is one of the only Disney animated movies with no music, like no songs, no nothing.
Excuse me, sir. Elmer Bernstein stole his score from Ghostbusters and just put it in this movie. How dare you not? It's literally like, I was listening to this the whole time. I'm like, this sounds so familiar. Is this like the Ghostbusters music? And then Elmer Bernstein shows up in the credits like, oh, fucking course it is. That theremin I recognize anywhere, Elmer.
Yeah,
although I will say, the only thing that could have made this movie worse is bad original songs. That might have made it worse. So, in a way, I am grateful that we did not have to hear the kids sing or the little side character thing.
Oh, yeah, Gurgi have a song? That would be the worst.
I will give you that. That is 100% accurate. Yes, because songs would have been so piss poorly written because this movie was such a rush job, just sort of keep the license on it or whatever the hell it was, that it would have just been terrible. It would have bogged it down so much more.
Yeah, and if anything, they could have just at least like taken some more advantage of some of the people they had on staff. Like, I showed Adam these like weird concept designs that were done by a young animator working there at the time named Tim Burton. And it's like the typical Tim Burton weird squiggly ass shit. I'll post it on the Twitter probably around the time this episode comes out. And like they were just like, nah, this is too weird for us. It's like, no, it's too interesting for this movie, evidently. Yes. Like you couldn't even implement any of this. And there had a lot of talented people working at the studio around this time. Like Ron Clements and John Musker were going to direct this, and they went on to do like The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and some of these other things. And even like, as much as we don't want to talk about him, John Lasseter was working there at the time. Right. Some other like talented people were like coming up at this point. And it just had this weird thing where, like, I think the directors especially, it's this weird combination of Ted Berman, who was like, this was his last production working with Disney before he quit entirely and retired. And then Richard Rich is the other director, which one, that's his real name. And two, he left Disney shortly after this and has directed not only The Swan Princess, but every direct-to-video sequel, which is surprisingly a lot to that stupid movie that came out like in the 90s. It's a bad Disney ripoff. So that's the talent. That's the people in charge we're working with.
And you know, here's the thing. If they would have went Tim Burton's character design, at least there would have been really cool character design. Like, the Horned King kind of looks cool. Like, he's got, like, deer antler horns, which is kind of a cool idea. And he's a skull face. Like, But he's in a giant cloak. You don't see him until the end of the fucking movie. The rest of the character design is so bland and boring. There's nothing even visual in this movie as far as even characters to make you excited. You get a pig.
Arguably the best character in the movie is the pig.
Oh, definitely.
No.
100%.
The pig is the crux of the movie. The pig is Samwise Gamgee.
Until the pig disappears for the third act. Then the fairies are like, hey, we'll take the pig back home. And then we don't see the pig until the end of the movie.
They try to drown the pig at one point. Like, you're like,
Right.
What the fuck is this? This movie feels like it was written by a sociopath. Where it's just a series of ideas that are not connected at all. And yet, here you go. This is what you get.
I mean, Thomas brought it up earlier, but like, you know, this movie, it's so uninteresting, yet the production of it is so deeply fascinating. Like, I believe it was Jeffrey Katzenberg, right? That was the one who tried to edit it down. Like, he went in the editing room himself, and they had to explain to him, like, you can't edit an animated movie. And he's like, the fuck I can. He's like, he just...
Right.
And like, wasn't it Eisner that had to like go in there and like pull him out and be like, yo, you can't do this? Like,
right, because like they both had come from like Paramount. At least I knew Eisner came from Paramount, so they were used to like live action stuff. And like I believe it was around this time that he like went in and saw like a bunch of the boards for like some other movie. And Eisner was just like, I don't know, I'm so used to reading scripts, I can't on all these pictures, I don't know what's going on. Like this, they're coming into all this. So, and like I said, that Waking Sleeping Beauty documentary is so interesting for that kind of clash.
Yes.
Between
really
the artists
great.
and these guys, yeah. Like we mentioned, like this, there were so many different delays because of people like this was around the time where Don Bluth left and took about like 25% of the animators with him, and around this time he was doing stuff like Secret of Nim, and not too long after this was like the American Tail, which were like beating Disney roundly around this time. Like even the biggest depressing point is like this same year that Care Bears movie came out and was way more successful than this. Like that's how low they were at this point.
Like one of its fourth or fifth weekends or something. Like,
yeah, I think even like the weekend it came out, a re-release of E.T. was like number one.
Jesus,
like, they couldn't even beat that.
And it's interesting what you said about like this and the latter movie that we're going to talk about. Like they represent like a starting period and like an ending period to like, okay, so like this is the rubble of which they started. Like this is their lowest point. And it really does show you how low they can go. And honestly, it's not even, I did my ranking on Letterboxd today. It's not even my least favorite Disney movie, but it's damn near close.
Out of curiosity, what is the worst one to you?
Home on the Range is my least favorite. Simply because I always refer to that movie as the movie as a kid that made me realize movies could be bad. And therefore, it has a very dark place in my heart where I realized that that's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to my movie watching.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I would say that one is worse. Also, I'd say my least favorite is Chicken Little.
Chicken Little is not a good movie, but it's one that I grew up with. So I don't think it's good at all, but it's hard for me to hate it either. Cause like I still have fond memories seeing it with my parents and like, you know, the whole thing. So I think I'm a little bit easier on that one than most people are.
I can see that. Adam, what is this the worst one to you?
No, this is not the worst Disney movie to me. I mean, it's close. This is pretty bottom of the barrel. I mean, I'll agree. But Thomas, I'm right there with you, man. Fucking Chicken Little.
Wow.
Oh.
I didn't realize you're so much disdain for Chicken Little. Wow.
Oh, dude, Chicken Little is the only Disney movie in the main canon that I have not finished. I don't know if it's because the animation doesn't hold up, or it's because how fucking much I hate Zach Braff. That might have something to do with it. Oh, man, and Home on the Range is right up there, too, though.
When did you guys watch it?
This is probably the third. I'd go Chicken Little, Home on the Range, then this.
Okay.
That's about my same thing as well. But yeah, I mean, I watched it around the time that it came out, Adam, to answer your question. And I was like, to be fair, I was more like 12, 13 around that time. So it was when I was starting to get out of it, but I was still like a secret Disney fan to that extent. Just like, it's not cool, but I'll still watch it. And I was just like, man, I don't know. Especially because that was the first like CG one they did. And that was like Circle 7 Animation, who was going to do all those bad direct-to-video sequels like Pixar movies that never happened. And it was like it was a real bummer to me. I'm just like, oh god, this is where we're going to go.
I mean, I have a hard, like, even if I did revisit Chicken Little, I have a hard time believing it would be lower than the Black Cauldron for me, because at least Chicken Little I can like associate some so bad it's entertaining qualities to it. This is just straight up boring to me. Like, and that's one of the worst offenses you can have in an animated movie, in my opinion. Like, it's nearly impossible to make me bored in a Disney movie, and yet this somehow accomplishes it.
Chicken Little at least has like a consistent kinetic energy, as opposed to this is just like, yeah, it really drags despite being about 82 minutes long. And it's one of those where like we mentioned, you want to like see this as like underrated like gem that no one's ever seen before, that you want to like champion at some point. But like honestly, you watch it's like, oh, I get why they didn't release this on home video till like 1998. I get why
absolutely.
This is the black sheep. Like, no one wants to associate themselves with this.
Absolutely. I love finding like these like lost relics of like cinema and just be like, yeah, this movie's great. Like, fuck you. Like, fuck everybody that disagrees with me. Because like, for example, my favorite Star Wars movie is The Last Jedi. Like, I love like Treasure Planet, Atlantis. Like, I love all these like kind of lost Disney movies. I was so ready to love this, and at every turn it was insulting me and insulting like what I love about Disney. But I am glad that I finally watched it, because now I can say that I've seen it, and I can not just look at it as if it's like a production story. I can actually say I've watched the film, I've experienced it, and have an actual opinion on it now.
Well, those sound like pretty good final thoughts, Adam, too. So we'll go ahead and start doing those now. So, Adam, your final thoughts on The Black Cauldron.
It is, in a singular word, boring. And that, to me, is the worst example of a film. There's nothing to take away from this movie. There's no sort of excitement, no hero's plight, no aesthetic value, no character design, no good songs, no good, even romance angle, no good fight scenes, no action, no drama, no nothing. This movie's not even a wet fart, because at least a wet fart, there's something with it. It's a ghost fart. It's just, it exists. I get the sort of fascination with it because of the production behind it, and the fact of the matter is it's a PG Disney movie, and there's for some reason everyone's like, oh, there's scary images. I think those are people who haven't seen the fucking movie, because it's in the last 20 minutes. And even then you're like, okay, fine. It's a piss poor last grab attempt to save a sort of financially struggling studio. And that's exactly what this movie is. It's an example of how to not do that properly. But in that way, it's very curious, because to see what they became only 4 years later with Little Mermaid. So it is, it's boring. It's forgettable. It's going to be like most of those we've watched on the show, where I'm like, I'm not going to remember any of this. But I am glad I watched it, just because of all the stigma behind it. But it's not one that I would ever watch again or recommend anyone to watch.
Yeah, I would say it's really only for if you're a Disney sort of history completionist type of person, like maybe Adam 2 and I are, where it's just like, well, gotta check that off the list, because it's on Disney Plus, it's there, you can watch it. They're not gonna advertise it very clearly, but it's there if you go digging. And it's just sort of like there's some interesting stuff, like sort of the look of the Horned King and some of the sequences near the end. If anything, I'd also recommend finding some of like the deleted stuff that's like floating around on the internet. Particularly, there was a whole sequence where one of the henchmen got killed by one of the skull guys and literally like melts into a skeleton. That's like, oh god, wow, that looks fascinating. Maybe if that wasn't here, I'd be slightly more kind to it. But that's the thing, is the most interesting stuff is clearly very chopped up. And then most of the movie is spent with a bunch of characters you really don't give a shit about. So I get why it's sort of like lost to the ages, and why it's kind of like the black sheep of the Disney animated canon. But, it's not the worst one, but it's still one of the lower ones. And I would definitely say, like, if nothing else, it gave us the ashes that the Phoenix would rise out of. That gave us, as Adam mentioned, like all of our sort of favorite movies of that 90s era and late 80s era. So nothing else, it's good for that.
Well, I mean, if there's anything that inspires creativity, it's being at your lowest point. So, in a way, I am grateful that this exists, because we got so many classics from just how low this one got.
True. Maybe like our next film that we'll talk about in a second. But first, here's a promo for an ESO so you can queue up right after ours.
My name is Mark McCrae, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
And now we'll go into our second feature, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
It is the moment you've been waiting for.
This spring, the movie you've been waiting for is coming to home video. It's Disney's 34th full-length animated feature. Every day, he rang the bells that brought the city to life.
If I picked a day to fly, this would be it.
I'll go.
When he came out of hiding.
By the way, great mask.
And came to the party. His whole world turned topsy-turvy.
How dare you defy me?
What a woman.
This spring, don't miss the celebration.
Wine, women, and so.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame, coming to video.
So The Hunchback of Notre Dame came out June 21st, 1996. In terms of a history setup, this is after all the Renaissance stuff happened that we mentioned earlier, like Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Lion King had all been big hits. And this is also following up Pocahontas. And I would argue this, along with Pocahontas and Lion King, kind of fit this weird thing where post Beauty and the Beast, where that got nominated for Best Picture and was so acclaimed, Jeffrey Katzenberg was so determined to get an animated movie to win Best Picture that it feels like, I would argue, Lion King, Pocahontas, and even this, which was the last movie that has any, like, the fingerprints of Katzenberg on it, are kind of attempting to sort of go for that kind of acclaim. And I would argue Pocahontas is, like, the worst example of that. Yes. Lion King is probably the best example. And then Hunchback is the one that I think kind of gets swept under the rug a bit more. I know, like, a lot of people around more of my age kind of, like, really love it. But I think it feels like one that was especially sort of dismissed around the time that it came out. And the weird thing is, like, I didn't mention much about sort of my introduction to Disney at the start, mainly because this was not only, like, the first big one I got into as a kid, this was maybe the first movie I saw in the theater.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
To be fair, I was very young, and I loved this movie. And going back and revisiting, it's just like, wow, this is such a dark, disturbing, upsetting movie. And I was like 4, fucking loved it. Best movie. It explains maybe too much, for sure, on that. But yeah, I really loved it at the time, and I haven't seen it in a while, and I've sort of gotten to, like, the backlash that kind of came against it about, like, oh, it's not that close to the novel and some of this other stuff. And I'm like, oh, is it going to hold up that well? And I'll say it has some very huge, clear weaknesses, but I would argue it also has, like, some of the best examples of what I love about Disney animation in this one in particular. But I'm curious especially of your opinion on it, Adam, too.
Yeah, so my history with this movie, weirdly enough, like I said earlier, like the first few that I got were like Little Mermaid, Toy Story, and Lion King. Like those are my introductory movies from my grandfather. And I remember he bought me this one. I don't know why I remember this so clearly, but he bought this for me the week that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man came out, because I remember my mom taking me to see Spider-Man in theaters. And then that weekend, when I was at my mom's, like, apartment, like, we were watching this for the first time. I really loved this movie as a kid. Like, even, like, at the age of 5, I just really adored it. I don't know. I was even though I didn't understand, like, all the mechanics of the plot and everything, there's something about the story and the emotion and the characters that I really grappled to as a kid. And it's one that I revisited quite a bit. And yet, you know, like most Disney movies, it's one that I went many, many years without seeing again. So I was really excited to rewatch this, especially because I did Black Cauldron first. So I was like, okay, it'll be nice to like do this second and like kind of have like a refresher. And yeah, it's still really damn good. It's I honestly forgot how dense and dark it is at points, but it still really works, and it always puts a smile on my face. So yeah, I'm glad to say I still think it holds up pretty well.
Well, and I'm curious, Adam, You had kind of said you hadn't seen this one in a while and you weren't a huge fan of it when it came out, but how do you feel about it now?
All right, well, a little bit of backstory. I was definitely one of those who was like, oh, this is just dumb. Like, I didn't like it. I didn't like the talking gargoyles. I still don't like the talking gargoyles.
We'll get into that. That's a huge problem. I completely agree. We'll get into that.
So it's fucking unnecessary. But I did not care for it when it first came out. And after a rewatch, watching it now, it's not necessarily a masterpiece of Disney animation. I mean, the animation's great, but as far as the full-on movie, but I dare say this is top-tier Disney. So beautiful to even look at, and the fact that the villain Frollo is just this horned up fucking piece of shit is such a different take on a Disney villain. It's so like disturbing the way he is, but still like you want to follow him because the character design, the voice performance is so good. It's just, this is such a good movie. But the thing that stops it from being perfect is the classic Disney tropes. Like I said, the gargoyles, or even the jester guy with his stupid song, and the way he looks, and the goat, and all this. None of that is necessary in this movie, and I think that's what kind of hinders this movie still to me, and probably the majority of people who don't like it to this day.
There's definitely tonal problems we'll get into, because like especially when this movie starts off as this, where you're talking about the Chopin character, who's played by Paul Kendall, who I think introduces the movie very well with his opening song. I think the Bells of Notre Dame song I think really works, and it's one of those things where like people talk about, oh, the Black Cauldron's really dark, but like that stuff is much more aesthetic and kind of like pushed off to the side of the last bit of the movie, as opposed to this, like from the start thematically is such a dark movie about like oppression and persecution, and especially like this weird lust thing that you're talking about with the Frollo character, who should mention Tony Jay, one of the great voice actors, doesn't get enough credit, who you've heard elsewhere, but this is like his finest role. He said it was like his bid for immortality, and it fits, because Frollo was one of those characters where like he was apparently based on like the Ray Fiennes character from Schindler's List, which makes a lot of sense. He feels very similar, like cruel and vicious, and the Hellfire song is like one of the best Disney sequences ever. It's just like such a beautiful, and like especially the way that it's animated and the way it looks and everything. But like throughout, it's a consistently dark, oppressive movie that still at the same time has this beauty that makes you at least invested to keep going with, instead of just slogging through like depressing awfulness the whole time.
Yeah, and I also forgot how small scale this movie is. Like, and I think that's a good thing. But I for some reason in my memory of it, I remember it being they went on more of an adventure, but it's really just reduced to the town, like just the center of town, really, like between the church and like a small little section where Esmeralda like comes in. Like you don't really go that far, but I like that about it. Like it's all about, like you said, the oppression of the town. I think that's a really cool quality. Like I like how it manages to feel like an epic story on such a small scale, character focused script. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think particularly it manages to do that with even something as isolated as like the Out There number, which I think is one of my favorite of like the I Want songs that Disney did all the time, of just like a character stating what they want. And I think that's a great example of where it's isolated to the bell tower, but it's just the way that it's shot, like so much great photography of like going through the catacombs, different corners of the Notre Dame like cathedral, and hearing Tom Hulce, who I think is an underrated Disney performer as Quasimodo. I think it's such a beautiful, sort of angelic but frail voice that works so well for his character. And the Out There, I love the way that it's choreographed, and his weird, almost like parkour kind of thing where he's like jumping around the fucking bell towers and shit. It's so like, it really opens up the scope, despite, like you mentioned, it being a much more like sort of intimate character story overall.
It reminds me a lot of Beauty and the Beast in that sense, right? Where, because like you're set in Beast's like mansion for pretty much the entire movie except for like the beginning and end, right? But the film does such a good job at making that feel massive. Like the corridors of the ballroom and like the library and stuff in Beauty and the Beast are so fully realized and detailed that it feels lived in, and therefore you want to spend time in there. And that is just as, if not even more, applied here. I think it's Yeah, I mean, watching this again on Disney Plus, I was watching it on my TV, and like I can't remember if it was in 4K or just like really crystal clear HD, but it was beautiful to watch. The restoration is just stunning, and it holds up really well, like all these years later. So I was just like immersed all over again, and it was like a lovely experience.
Yeah, I watched this with my daughter, my 5-year-old, and she was totally into it. The only thing that bothered her is there's no princess. I'm like, well, Esmeralda's kind of a princess, so that was a thing. But she was really, really enjoying this movie. She loved it. She watched the whole thing. She thought it was very funny, especially when I can't remember his name, but Kevin Kline made the horse sit down on the guard. She laughed. She thought it was hilarious. She was hook, line, and sinker into this in comparison to our previous feature, to where 5 minutes in, she's like, I want to watch something else. She was totally into it. And that's one thing that I do enjoy. Again, not to play the, well, I'm a dad card, but to be able to go back and watch some of these that I maybe didn't give a fair enough shake to, or go back and watch it sort of vicariously through a child's eyes, it makes you appreciate it a lot more, because it is a thrilling movie. It's great. And I do agree, Tom Hulse, who I'm typically not a huge fan of his, period. I think he's fine. But his performance as Quasimodo is so good. It's so underrated. And I mean, Kevin Kline, Demi Moore, it's a pretty stellar voice cast. I love the look of pretty much everything in this movie. It's just, I'm sort of dumbfounded why this is considered so weak, other than sort of the faults I mentioned. But even Tarzan, which is really sort of cherished, has pretty much the same faults that this one does. Like we mentioned, the subject material, especially sort of Frollo's song, is so dark. It's so twisted and so sexually charged. And it's kind of unlike anything they've done prior or since.
Yeah, the Hellfire thing obviously is something that, like, when I was a kid, I was not aware of what the hell was exactly going on, except like, oh, he wants to do something bad to Esmeralda, and it's like, oh no, he wants to do a lot of horrible things to Esmeralda that are
he
really
wants to do some bad. He wants to do some bad. That's for damn sure.
That are really upsetting. We should also credit some of the people who like wrote the music for here, which is like Steven Schwartz did the lyrics, who he did Pocahontas and later go on to do like Wicked and stuff like that, and then Alan Menken, who had done the scores ever since like Little Mermaid on most of the musical ones, especially. I think this is his most underrated score, just as an overall movie score. I think it's like beautiful and rousing. Like the choral stuff especially is great, and in Hellfire you really see that, where like it feels like this big operatic massive thing that once again is all I say with one character in his imagination, and it's like it shows like how powerful especially a hand-drawn animation can be about covering something so taboo and controversial, and does such a phenomenal job, especially the way like Esmeralda appears in the fire and all this other stuff. It's really incredible. I can get why that especially has like really lasted in the consciousness of people around like Adam too and my age, who are just like, oh yeah, that was really fucked up and I don't know why, and now I know why, and it's really fucked up.
Right.
I forgot. Did this get any Oscar attention?
I think it got like a best score. Like it was a weird time where like comedy musical score was a category for the Academy Awards, so it got like a nomination for that. And I mean, you can tell that they're trying to position, like they even get like a song one for like, I think the one they were trying to really push was the God Help the Outcasts, which is probably like one of the weaker songs to me, just because it feels almost more like it's a Christian song from around that time in particular. It feels like it'd be on Christian radio.
Well,
to some extent.
But dude, even Quasimodo's main song, like his first song, is basically the Little Mermaid song, where she wants to be part of the world and he wants to be out there. It's kind of the same beat.
I mean, well, look, every one of these Disney Renaissance movies kind of have that. Aladdin has that with like one of his songs. Like a lot of them have this kind of song to it.
Hell, even Lion King has it.
True, they all have that kind of structure to it. But I think without there, it's able to at least like differentiate itself by being fully about someone who isn't just a part of like the Under the Sea Kingdom or whatever. He's alone entirely, except for his gargoyle pals, who are so great and so funny. Everyone loves them. They're so wonderful, right? Everyone loves those gargoyles.
What a huge misstep was that?
I don't know, because like when I was a kid, I thought they were funny. Upon rewatch, it didn't get to the point of, and again, I already forgot the sidekick in Black Cauldron's name, but it didn't get to that point with me where they were that grating. But there's definitely a point where I was like, okay, this is like, it's not necessary. Like a lot of the time in like a lot of Disney movies where there's like comedic relief, you're like, oh, you didn't really need to do that. But in this movie especially, I'm like, you really didn't have to do that. Like, it's like when you mentioned that your daughter left out, like the Kevin Kline bit with the horse, like that's plenty.
Yeah,
Like that's enough.
I agree. They never got there. I still don't think they're grating. I don't think that. But to me, they remind me of like Mushu and Milan, where they're not necessary. It doesn't need to be there. Like there's no.
I like the idea of him at least having like gargoyles as sort of like his only friends, so that like come to life only when he can see them. It's just a problem of one, there are too many of them. I think if you just had one, or maybe even two, like I don't mind the two. There's the female, like the older one, and then there's the prim and proper British one. But I think the Jason Alexander is the exact overkill. That's where it pulls over. And it feels like they're just kind of trying to do like Genie again. With like, let's cast a comedian and all of that.
If they'd have leaned more into those being like maybe imaginary friends, it would have worked so much better.
Right, because they're really inconsistent about that, because sometimes they're imaginary, but they're not imaginary to certain things, and they participate in the battle at the end. That's where it really gets grating. Where it's like, there's this mass, like, Paris is burning, and, like, fucking you're doing your Wizard of Oz, like, fly my pretties jokes and shit. Like, it's just like, guys, we don't need to do this. You're better than this.
I mean, again, because like I know every Disney movie has that, like they have the sidekicks that make jokes, but in this one especially, considering it's a bad juxtaposition almost to like how dark the material is and yet how light their jokes are. Like sometimes it meshes well. Like I think like the Beauty and the Beast, like the little side characters in that work perfectly in that movie, right? Because they're actual characters. They serve a purpose to the narrative and they have an actual conclusion by the end. But I would say this has like the worst example of it because like they serve no purpose other than having levity. It feels like something, I work in marketing and it's like, it feels like something that's just there for marketing material. It doesn't feel like it's there for narrative purpose. So, as good as this movie is, it's definitely a downvote for me.
And Lord knows, when I was a kid, like the marketing for this was very much based on like Festival of Fools and the Gargoyles. Like they didn't mention any of the other shit. Like I remember there was like a Burger King commercial where like they sold puppets at Burger King. And it's just like a kid like, look, it's Quasimodo and everyone's playing. Like I think what turned people off so much was really like the Disney machine seeming to churn out a movie that felt like, oh, this is like a really crass commercial version of this older story. And like with the original source material, like I've read the original book since, and I can say that it's interesting, especially because it's mostly about the architecture of the building, really, because it was like the building was new at the time, and it's just like, oh my god, this incredible building. It was like him trying to kind of preserve the building at the time, which I really respect, but at the same time, the story stuff feels a lot more hidden in there, and he's even like, since he adapted into like an opera that removed a lot of that stuff, this story's been changing so much. I necessarily don't mind it being changed all the way up to this point in the way it does, where I still think it keeps a lot of the darkness there, and also I think gives Quasimodo a bit more of like character depth than I would say a lot of other versions have done.
No, I definitely agree with you, and even to get back on the Gargoyles with what Adam 2, again, I'm not comfortable saying that, but with what Adam 2 was saying, to me, you kind of got the perfect mix of that type of character to where like the fun, spunky sidekick that you love, and then the ones that kind of don't matter with like Hercules. With Hades, two guys. To me, that's the perfect mix of this. And then with the goat, with the earring, it doesn't fit in the grand sort of scheme of this movie because it is inherently a very dark story, and they tell it in very dark sort of ways a lot in this movie. But then you get these just dumb bullshit, we got to sell toys moments, and that's what it feels like.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, of course, when I was like, I think 5 when I watched it for the first time, I that's not something that I, of course, acknowledged when I was a kid, because, when you're a kid and you're watching these movies, it's not, it just flies over your head, like all that stuff, because it hits you exactly. So rewatching it was certainly interesting, because not only did you see, like, the definite, like, here's the marketing and the toy push, but also, like, you do also miss how dark and depressing and honestly layered the story and themes are. So like it was an equal measure for me, where there are things definitely where it's not as great as I remember. I remember it kind of being like a Disney masterpiece, and I walked away with it being, yeah, it's really bold and really good, but not quite a masterpiece, but not bad either. Not like by any stretch of imagination is this movie bad. It's really, really damn good. just maybe not also as good as I remember it.
Yeah, because like there's other problems that we haven't really mentioned. Like I would say I agree I like Kevin Kline, but I would say Phoebes is kind of like a lame character overall. He feels just sort of like it's this weird thing where Kevin Kline obviously has like a lot of energy that is put into the character, but he's like animated so stiffly. It reminds me a lot of like John Smith from Pocahontas, where he feels so much more stiff and stillward.
Yeah, I
and
was
even,
like,
like
it's very proto John Smith.
Well, to post John Smith because it's right after
Post John Smith, but still proto. It feels like a weaker version of even that weak character.
I don't know. He's like I don't want to go into Pocahontas, but he is such like a fucking blank piece of paper in that movie. Because at least like Kevin Kline, I agree, has a lot of like great sort of comedic timing and stuff that's going on here. The animation, I think, is just trying to kind of catch up. So that kind of hurts, especially like sort of the romantic angle, which I like the idea that they don't have Esmeralda end up with Quasimodo. Because it feels like it's much more a story about like him learning to have like a friend to some degree. It doesn't need to be a romantic connection. But at the same time, like her ultimate romantic connection is with Phoebes, who is one of the duller human characters. And it feels like, especially when Quasimodo like brings their hands together and stuff, just like, is this really earned? I don't know if it was that earned.
It's also weird because like a lot of the movie is very anti-authoritarianism, and then like you have his character, and like he's also a sense of authority, but he's the good kind of authority. So it's very weird to me, like the kind of line they try to like push with him. Like it's kind of a very middle of the road kind of thing. I mean, I like Kevin Kline a lot, like just in general, and I think his voice fits the character well. But the character also doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't. I mean, it's everything you guys said. He doesn't really mesh completely well to the narrative, because I really do think him and Esmeralda are enough. Like I cannot think of anything that Kevin Kline's character adds to the movie that wasn't already there. Honestly, like some funny bits aside, like that's it.
He's got a bitch and goatee. He adds that to the movie.
That's true.
That's
he
true.
does have that. And I will say, I think Esmeralda, while I think there's been some criticism, especially sort of like of the treatment of the Romani characters, which they use a different word. We're not going to use that word here because there's been a lot of stuff post this movie that's like, that's not a great word to say. But sort of like that treatment of the Romani people, I can get why it's kind of like it feels sanded over, especially with the fact of like the sort of how the Catholic Church is even treated in this movie. Like where Judge Frollo was originally an archdeacon, and they changed that, and they're like, we don't want to offend any of the Catholics, and the Catholic Church is totally treated as like, this is a safe haven for you. It's like, sure it always was, guys, right? But like they sand over some of those edges, but at the same time, I think Esmeralda is like a fun, spunky character who I believe her sort of search to like try and protect her people, and also her empathy toward Quasimodo, I think is really endearing.
It doesn't go to the point where it feels like she's pitying him either. Like you genuinely buy the friendship. It doesn't feel like, oh, this poor guy that I have to help. Like she genuinely sees his good qualities and natures, and he like also sees like the good in like her cause and what she's doing. And I don't know, you feel the connection. Like it doesn't feel like a forced relationship either. So that's like why the ending actually does hit, because you believe their friendship and what they would do for each other. So I think it works in that regard.
I definitely agree with you on that aspect. And one thing I do want to say is sort of the portrayal of the sort of the Romani people in this. I love that they're all different sort of colors and looks and creeds and everything. It's not such a stereotypical sort of example. It's sort of a group of like-minded sort of wandering people that sort of get together, and because it could have gotten very problematic very fast. And I mean, obviously the word that shall not be mentioned is problematic by today's standards, which I got to be honest, I had no idea up until recently, which I think that's most people, just because we're finally catching up to horrible things that we knew nothing about. But I do like that it's not a sort of stereotypical look to all of them. I think that's handled actually really well.
Yeah, they're not treated as necessarily as bad as they could have been. Yeah, I agree. For the time, it feels like it's less progressive to a certain degree. But as we've mentioned, they did some things that we, as a society have kind of like, especially as like young kids like Adam too and I were, we kind of like glommed onto like, oh, that's not a problem, right? That's what they're called.
Why do you keep singling me out as the old man? this whole episode, well, me and Adam, you, like I'm just sitting here like, God damn it! I'm Gran Torinoing you. Like, what the fuck?
Why didn't we cover 3 caballeros?
Stay off my goddamn lawn furniture.
But no, I think I agree. I think they at least do a pretty good job of singling out that like this persecution is a huge problem. And that it was at the very least they did as much as they could within like a Disney-fied sphere on that. And I think that's the stuff, like you said, that like feels the most interesting, as opposed to like once they have like all this like horrible like Esmeralda's gonna be burnt up, and then they have like a bunch of guards like doing goofy yells and shit. That's a problem. I agree. It's just that like it'll have weird tonal inconsistencies just kind of fall off. But and especially even like we've mentioned some of the songs, but I would say the weakest song is definitely the Gargoyle song.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Where it feels like it could be like fun in a more bigger, showy Broadway way, where like most of these songs are big Broadway numbers, but that feels like straight out of like a straight up huge comedy number that just feels so like unfitting for this entire thing.
It feels like it's the song because kids will think they're funny, so here's their song. That's what it feels like. There's not really a lot of thought or care put into it. It's just, hey, go and make the funny guys sing. It's dumb. It's dumb.
Yeah, it's weird because like this, I would say this has the highest, like some of the highest highs of Disney. Like truly, like a genuine political kind of message, a gorgeous animation, good songs opposed to the bad songs, memorable characters, a good heart, all that good stuff. But also the weak comedic characters, the bad songs, some Pramac stereotypes. So it's interesting, but I do genuinely think the good outweighs the bad in that regard, because like, again, the highs are just so damn high, and even though it didn't quite like live up to like how high I remembered it being as a kid, I can see why it's so heavily regarded like still today, because I don't know, like there's just points in the movie where I'm kind of like astounded at like, wow, they actually did that. And stuff I don't feel like they would ever do in a modern day today with their like most recent movies. So yeah, I still greatly respect it.
And would you personally say this is the end of the Renaissance to you, or would you say it's a bit later?
Personally for me, I mean, you mentioned earlier Tarzan. I think that was like 199, 98. Yeah. I think Tarzan's probably what I would consider to be even maybe Lilo and Stitch. I know that's a little bit late, but like Lilo and Stitch was a big hit and also very innovative and one of the last hurrahs of hand-drawn animation. But actually, yeah, Lilo and Stitch is my answer. I think that's not one that gets thrown around a lot, but that's my answer, Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah, I guess I would also probably put Treasure Planet more as like that's like the nail in the coffin. Because unfortunately, right. I agree. I don't think that one is nearly as bad as people say it is, but it is definitely sort of like I don't think as big a flop as like a Black Cauldron, but the one that made it officially like, we're going to stop doing hand-drawn stuff.
I love Treasure Planet, and I fully admit most of that's nostalgia, but I remember seeing that because I remember it came out Thanksgiving 2003, and I remember begging my mom to go see it with me on Thanksgiving Day, like while my grandparents were like making Thanksgiving dinner. We went, and I distinctly remember going to the AMC theater, and we were the only ones in the theater that like Thanksgiving Day, and it was depressing, but I loved the movie, and I've rewatched it recently, and it holds up really well in my opinion. So yeah, I wouldn't Lilo and Stitch just because it's the big hit. It was like their last big hand-drawn hit, but in my heart, sure, Treasure Planet's definitely up there.
Okay, but it sounded like you kind of had solid final thoughts for Hunchback, but let's go ahead to Adam, and especially along with your final thoughts on Hunchback, also, would you consider it the end of the Renaissance?
No, I'm going to go ahead and say it's Atlantis, the Lost Empire. I think the final sort of hurrah. Like, I understand Lilo and Stitch was a big hit. And I do really enjoy Treasure Planet as well. But I think Atlantis was, I mean, it wasn't a flop, of course, but one that people were like, maybe Disney is stretching a little far at this point. And I think Atlantis was kind of the one. And my final thoughts on Hunchback is I think it's a perfectly fine movie. I think it's really fun. It's damn near a magnificent movie. Like I said, the gargoyles are probably the big thing in it that sort of keep it from getting that notch. But still, I think it's beautifully animated. It does have some really fucking bangers of songs. It's got really, really good character design and voice acting. And you find yourself genuinely caring about a platonic friendship in a Disney movie, and that's not something that happens quite often. It's usually a lot of romance, and in this, it's just a genuine friendship. For that, I mean, I think it's not underrated, it's not overrated. I think it fits perfectly where it does for most people. Like, that was pretty good, and I think that's an accurate description. It's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, like I said, this was sort of like a big movie I glommed onto and loved. I would say it's definitely not quite in that tier. Like, it's not a top 10 Disney necessarily, but I'd say it has a fair shot, like top 15 or 20. I would say in terms of just like like I said, the grand scale, the sort of epic nature of it, despite being intimate sort of character thing. Like, I agree. I think the good well outweighs the bad, but the bad is still lingering enough to where you're like, okay, this definitely puts an asterisk on it being like top tier Disney necessarily. But the stuff that is great is like huge heights that I think deserve a bit more credit for what they are. If nothing else, just the vocal performance of someone like a Tony Jay and the Frollo character in general, I think is one of the more daring examples of like a Disney animated villain in particular. But yeah, I would definitely say if you kind of stayed away from this because of sort of that reputation it has of maybe either being too dark or too light a version of this dark story, I'd say give it a shot, especially if you have that Disney Plus there. Because as Adam too mentioned, I really agree. I love the look of the restoration. It's one of those great examples where like it really feels big and sweeping, especially a sequence we didn't talk about, but the whole bit where Quasimodo is like on the rope and picks up Esmeralda out of like the fire pit and then brings her back up and says like sanctuary. It's like, that's a dope moment. That's such a really well animated moment, and it's a really great meld of like the CG and the 2D.
There's some like Disney moments that are like seared into your brain of like you remember the first time you watched them and how you felt when you saw that imagery for the first time, and that is like the exact moment that you're talking about is one of my like all-time favorite Disney moments. And watching it again the other day, I got chills down my spine watching it again. So yeah, I highly recommend watching the restoration on Disney Plus. It looks amazing.
Yes, and that's the end of our discussion of our two movies, but we got some stuff to do before the end where we'll pick our movies for next week. Stay tuned for that, including some feedback from all of y'all, because every week at DEDBpod on Twitter and Facebook, we ask you about your favorite, least favorite movies related to whatever topic we're doing. And so we got some people who contributed, like James Rodriguez at RoddersJ04, friend of the show, says, topping my favorites are Lilo and Stitch and The Lion King, with Frozen and The Emperor's New Groove following closely right after. My least favorites include Cinderella, Pocahontas, and Peter Pan. Special mention for the overlong advert that is Ralph Breaks the Internet. Emily Slade at Why This Film Pod says best Fantasia, Fantasia 2000, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Zootopia. Worst, I'd argue no movie falls under this category. They all bring at least something, but then there are some that I haven't seen for fear of this theory falling, like Home on the Range or Chicken Little. Also, The Black Cauldron is a gem, a hot mess of a gem, a diamond in the rough, a terrible, wonderful pile of poo. Christian Alvarez says, Disney is a well-known studio for their animation. It has more successes than failures compared to their live-action department, especially over the years. My favorites start with Disney's Fantasia, which helps me appreciate classical music as a young kid. Aladdin is my favorite because of Ron Williams' electrifying performance as the genie, and The Emperor's New Groove and Atlantis the Lost Empire are underrated gems. My least favorite Disney animated movies are probably Dinosaur and the animated sequels that Michael Eisner produced throughout his tenure. Rachel Hillis says, for best, Aladdin, which has the best song from anything Disney, Beauty and the Beast, which has the highest concentration of great songs, Emperor's New Groove, Lilo and Stitch, and Sleeping Beauty to keep it to a top 5. An honorable mention has to go to The Great Mouse Detective because it's super underrated. And worst, never been a fan of Pocahontas or Pinocchio, the latter being because, in my opinion, it's extremely disturbing. Brian Kane says, The Black Cauldron is a side of Disney that I wish would come back. We need more kids' movies that scare the shit out of them. And then Movies After Work at Movies Work on Twitter says, best, Great Mouse Detective, Jungle Book, Moana, Beauty and the Beast, Fantasia, and Emperor's New Groove. Worst, Frozen, Black Cauldron, Meet the Robinsons, Chicken Little, Zootopia, and The Lion King 2019, which technically doesn't count, but also was animated. I'll give him that.
Meet the Robinsons slander hurts my heart just a little bit, but I'll let it pass.
So that's a question I had, given like your affection for Chicken Little. You're a fan of sort of that weird mid-2000s period then? With some of that stuff like Meet the Robinsons and Bolt.
Bolt is okay. I saw it once in theaters. I didn't even like love it as a kid. But Meet the Robinsons, that's a movie. I don't know if you guys have this movie, but sometimes if I like want to tear up a little bit, I'll watch a certain scene from a certain movie on YouTube and it'll get like a good tear out of me. I can watch the Meet the Robinsons ending anytime and just be like, yeah, yeah, that's the good shit. Like that's really good. Like I love that movie so much. So I don't know if that's a hot take or not. I don't even know how well that movie has aged, but I love that movie.
I don't know. Sorry to say, I don't think many people have any takes on it. I think that one's very forgotten, unfortunately, amongst them. I remember seeing it. I remember it had some fun stuff in it. Because that's the one with the bowler hat villain guy, right?
Yeah, it has.
Right.
I mean, probably in retrospect, it doesn't have an amazing twist, but I remember the twist for 9-year-old Adam was absolutely mind blowing at the time. So yeah, and I have just very good memories with that movie. So I still love Meet the Robinsons personally, and I can't even remember what else is from that era, but that's definitely one of the highlights for me.
You know, one I would say from that era that I don't think gets enough credit, especially I think Frozen kind of took this movie's thunder a bit, is I think Tangled is one of the better, especially princess ones recently.
Fucking A. I absolutely love Tangled. I love Flynn. I think he's such a good character. I love the animation of that movie. I think Tangled, out of the sort of CGI Disney movies, is top 3 without a doubt.
Yeah. I when I did my letterbox ranking today, it ended up out of 49 movies that I've seen from Disney Animated, it ended up at number 5. It's my favorite CGI. Tangled's near perfect for me. Kind of what we were talking about with Hunchback, where some of the comedic elements don't work. It kind of loosens the story a little bit, but like Tangled, every beat of that movie works to perfection. I've seen it like over 20 times, mostly because of my little sister, but it's one that we can agree on. Like if she puts it on, I'm good with it, you know. And even though she's getting older, like we still watch it together sometimes, and it has a lovely place in my heart. And I think it's a perfect Disney movie. I love it so much.
Yeah, and I would say that kind of started like a fun little, not quite renaissance, but at least like the better examples of their CG animation, because not too long after that is like Wreck-It Ralph, which I think is pretty great. And even the Frozen, despite like sort of the over saturation of it, I think still pretty much works. Or Big Hero 6 I think is fun, and Zootopia, Moana as well. Like some of those are fun. Though I do agree, like stuff like the 2 sequels they did with like the Ralph Breaks the Internet and Frozen 2 they're not terrible, but it feels kind of like, yeah, these feel like cash grabs. Really.
Yeah. I thought Ralph 2 was decent. I didn't really care for Frozen 2, but I've actually enjoyed most of the Disney 2010 movies.
Moana to me is perfection as far as the CGI. Something about Moana I love.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if when she's singing the fucking How Far I'll Go, that's a fucking banger. And, like
top 10 Disney songs of all time in my opinion.
Oh man, I get goosebumps every time when she's fucking into it. I'm like, oh, dude, she's got it now, son. Fuck that ocean. It's so dope. Frozen 1 and 2, I can totally sort of like, I'm good without those. I've seen them probably at least 30 times each, and I've heard the song sung with very bad broken English by my daughter, I don't know how many times. I love Tangled. I love the first Wreck-It Ralph. I think it's so funny. The first one. The second one is kind of, it's okay. I love the first one, though. I think the vocal performances, especially Jack McBrayer as Fix-It Felix, is so great. But as far as like post-2000s Disney, man, I can't get enough of The Princess and the Frog. To me, it is the best swan song of sort of hand-drawn animation that they possibly could have done. It's beautiful. I love the music. I love the character designs. It's got so much great, sort of heart to it, and there's a lot of emotion behind a lot of it. Like, really, I cry because the Firefly dies. Like, what the fuck is happening to me? It's just, it's so beautiful. And that's the thing. I mean, we're talking about a titan of cinematic industry. I mean, out of 59 sort of canon films that they've done, you could maybe say there's 15 to maybe 19 of them that don't add up. But we're talking at least 40 that are like all-time classics.
And at least 25% of the bad ones are just like, remember when they did package films in the 40s during World War II?
Yeah, right,
just like it's a collection of stupid shorts. Like they barely count as movies.
I also want to say I just saw Princess and the Frog for the first time over quarantine last year. I don't know why I missed it, Well, it was kind of what Thomas was mentioning, I think, with Chicken Little, I believe, where you were like, you want to be found dead like by a Disney movie or something, and like that was the same thing with me. Like I was 12 years old when it came out, so I was just kind of like, oh, I don't need to see a stupid Disney movie.
I'm a big boy. I'm too good for cartoons.
Exactly, and yeah, the next month I went to go see The Squeakquel, so like it didn't add that.
Hey, look, there are live action people and it's not a cartoon. It's cool. It's for big boys.
Exactly. Like they rap. Come on. Like but I really loved it. It was really damn good. It's stunning. The animation's beautiful. I think it was like one of the first movies I watched because I recently bought a 4K TV like late last year, and it was one of the first ones I popped in, and oh my god, it was stunning. And the music, the characters, the colors, everything about it. I know Winnie the Pooh was the last hand-drawn one, but like that's really the like last classical like hand-drawn one that they did. And boy oh boy, is it one swan song to have, like, to leave off on, because it's a beautiful movie.
Yeah, even though I would hope they would eventually go back to hand-drawn to some extent. Maybe not being the dominating force, but hopefully at least like do something hand-drawn at some point.
Mixture. Yeah, a nice
mixture.
Yeah,
even a nice mixture, yeah. But I mean, we also haven't talked that much about classic Disney. I'm not sure, because I think when I was revisiting some of these recently, like, super classic Disney is full of movies either respect or do not respect because they're kind of like dated in horrible ways.
Sure.
So it's that weird mix of, like, the ones I would say like stick out, like Pinocchio, I would say is my favorite, like the really old school ones. And then also I was decrying the package films, but I really love the Ichabod and Mr. Toad, particularly the Sleepy Hollow sequence.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
The Sleepy Hollow sequence is so good. I've literally watched that every Halloween with my daughter for the last 3 years. It's so good. I love everything about it. The character design, how fucking cocky Ichabod is in it. Yes. And he, like, it's so dumb. It's so good though. Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I think that's just, what a phenomenal movie. You almost wish it was a full length.
I've actually never seen it, so I'm gonna add it to my Disney Plus watch list.
Yeah, you don't have to see the other package films. That's the one to see, pretty much. is that one? Though I will also say, in terms of like especially what we were talking about earlier with like the Disney restoration, I watched Sleeping Beauty for the first time in a while on like the Disney Plus restoration, and that movie is still so gorgeous. And it was like shot in 70mm and shit, or like the equivalent for animation, and it's beautiful to look at.
Never a fan of that one, but it's also, I was a little like watching G.I. Joe, and so I was like, it's about girls, so I never gave it a real shot. I'm guessing if I rewatched it, I'd probably fall in love with it. Well, like I said, Sword in the Stone I really liked as a kid. Now, no, not so much, but I still think Robin Hood is like the undersung hero of that sort of down era of Disney, where like they weren't really putting out great stuff. I still think Robin Hood holds up immaculately. I still think it's super fun. I love the rooster. I love the songs. I love Prince John. I love everything about Robin Hood. I think it's damn near perfect.
It's a weird, like, very chill adventure film. It's like, it has like almost weird like 70s. Hey, we're just chilling out, man. It's cool. Like, we're robbing from the rich, give to the poor. It's great, man.
I have not seen that since I was like 6 years old. I need to rewatch it. But
it's still good, man.
When we're talking about classic Disney, we're talking like pre-Black Cauldron, right? Like way back.
I think we're talking pre-Little Mermaid, I think, is the way to go. Yeah.
Okay, because that's why I was asking, because Little Mermaid was like the big one that I grew up with as a kid.
Yeah.
But pre-Little Mermaid, I think my favorite from that era, definitely Fantasia. Like, I love Fantasia so much.
It's a masterpiece. Whatever it is on the hill, the one with the demon.
Yes.
Night on Bald Mountain. Yeah, that segment.
Yes. Scared the shit out of me. Yet it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen when I was a kid.
Well, being a Florida boy myself, and kind of growing up around the Disney parks, you're kind of forced to be a Fantasia stan. Every time I went to Disney as a kid, like Fantasia down my throat, and so eventually I watched it when I was like 8 or 9. Loved it, and I rewatched it recently when I got Disney Plus, and still holds up. And Fantasia, I know it's not what we're talking about with the pre Little Mermaid era, but Fantasia 2000 as well still holds up really well.
They're really good, particularly the Rhapsody in Blue segment of Fantasia 2000 is one of my favorite sort of shorts.
Oh, God. So good.
Yeah,
I
really love that.
My favorite of the Disney Renaissance was, and still to this day, because if you watch it in HD and or 4K, whatever you kids are calling it these days, me, it's just putting on my glasses, is Beauty and the Beast. I think it's immaculate looking still. And I love the character design. I love the songs. I love everything about Beauty and the Beast. To me, it has become my favorite. When I was a kid, it would definitely have been Aladdin. But now as I'm older, it's Beauty and the Beast. I love Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I really, really like Beauty and the Beast a lot. It was one, surprisingly, that I had not seen until the remake came out. I don't know how I missed it. I'm pretty sure like I saw bits and pieces of it, but it was one of those movies as a kid that like I knew the characters, I knew like the dance sequence, I knew all the like iconic scenes.
Sure.
But I think I definitely was like playing with my Legos during like the character moments, like I wasn't paying attention fully to it. And when I watched it for the first time pre-remake, I was like, wow, this is like you see why it got so much attention. Like that story that they told in Waking Sleeping Beauty about them showing a rough cut of it to the New York Film Festival back in the 90s, and getting a standing ovation, even though half of it was like storyboard, and you understand it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And by the way, Gaston is one of the best Disney villains ever. I absolutely love Gaston so much.
He's great. Yeah,
he's good. He's so good. It's so stupid. His song is like my favorite thing ever.
He eats 5 dozen eggs in order to get large.
I was big as a barge. Every last inch of me is covered in hair. It's so fucking dumb. It's so great. Yeah, I that remake was atrocious, but the original animation is just fantastic.
Yeah, the one I wanted to bring up next, like probably the last one I like have on my mind is Hercules, because that's one that I literally I replayed that too many times. Like I remember one time my grandma came in the room and she's like, "Are you really watching it again? Like do you have like 10 other movies? Like can you pick another one?" Like it got to the point where it annoyed my family, but I used to love
What year did Hercules come out, guys? Like 2001?
97.
Yeah.
97. Okay. So I was like 15 when Hercules came out, right? I got a Phil toy from like McDonald's or something. I don't know why. I just paid for it. Like I didn't get a Happy Meal. And I still have that Phil toy. I love Hercules so much. It's fantastic to me. I love the designs of the Titans. I love the designs of Zeus. Everything about it. I think Hercules is obviously people really like it, but I think it's one that doesn't necessarily get enough credit as a Disney masterpiece. I think it's right up there.
I would have thought the same thing, I guess, more when I was younger. I still really like Hercules. I recently just watched it like a couple weeks ago.
Well, because of James Woods, is that what you're saying?
The sad thing is James Woods is like the best part of that movie, and it's a bummer because he's such a piece of shit, but he's so perfect in that movie.
He's so perfect. Whoa, is my hair out? I love Hercules so much.
I got some moussaka in my throat, huh? Tough crowd.
Yeah,
tough crowd.
I Can Go the Distance is a fucking banger.
Mm-hmm.
Literally every part of that movie, like I adore. Like the hero's journey of it all is just so amazing, and the animation and like I don't know, like being a Greek boy myself, like just the way they adapt mythology in a Disney manner is, I don't know, it's flawless.
Yeah, I agree, and I love the glow. Even it's something simple as that, the glow of the gods, and the way it's animated. It's so perfect to me. It looks so good.
Well, and particularly the muses, I think, are so fun. And it's weird. It's post Howard Ashman dying, but you can clearly tell it's very influenced by like Little Shop of Horrors and shit like that. It has that kind of like flair and fun to it when they come on. Especially like the "I Won't Say I'm in Love" song is like the best one of those songs.
It's incredible. And even like the gospel ladies at the beginning, like oh my god, like it's perfect.
And one I want to address because we're of course we're running long because we're all Disney dorks. Emperor's New Groove. I think obviously it was mentioned is so good. It's so good. Eartha Kitt and Patrick Warburton slay me in that movie. I still think they're fucking hilarious and perfect.
Yeah. That's another one where I remember seeing it in theaters, and I really loved it when I was a kid. It's another one that I haven't revisited in a long time, but I think I exhausted my VHS of it so much that it's forever engraved in my memory. I remember every plot beat, every joke, everything.
That's David Spade performance.
Not a high bar, but true. Very true. Right. But I agree with the Emperor's New Groove, especially that's another one where this documentary is not on Disney Plus, but the one when is the Sweatbox is the one where it's like it was a documentary that was filmed about just like the weird production of that when it was going to be one of these like big grandiose Disney musicals, and then that completely fell apart. So like let's make it a buddy comedy, and it surprisingly worked.
Yeah, that's deeply fascinating. For anyone that doesn't know what Thomas is talking about, look that up. It is so fascinating, that entire story.
Yeah, and it was shot by Sting's wife, and Sting's sort of like your weird protagonist for that documentary, where it's like, I wrote a bunch of songs, and then they didn't use any of them, except like the very end.
Well, of course they didn't, because they're all ooh-la, ooh-la, ooh-la.
But yeah, as Adam said, we are going long, so we'll go ahead and get into the close of the show, where we want to thank everybody for that feedback. Also, thanks to people like Chris Oliver, who does the intro and outro music for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarter for the art for our show. And thanks, of course, to our supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/DEDVpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get bonus podcasts that we put out there. And also, you get to pick certain movies and topics we do for the show. And this week, when this episode's going up, there's going to be a poll for, we're going to do another example of video game-inspired films as a topic. And Adam has the good choices, and you get to vote between his two choices. Adam, what are the good choices?
The remake of Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, which I think is a fucking underrated movie. I think it's totally sweet and funny and hilarious. And the 90s horror film starring Edward Furlong, Brain Scan, which is one of those, you either love it or hate it.
Or don't know much about it, because when you told me that was the case, I had no idea what the hell you were talking about.
Oh, you are in for a treat if that gets chosen. By the way, Patrons choose it.
Well, yeah, that'll be very interesting, and you all get to choose between those two. That'll go up this Wednesday, so make sure to vote for that. And of course, also, we want to thank our guest here, Adam to Adam. Thank you for coming on the show. And why don't you go ahead and promote yourself a bit? Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Adam_not Sandler. You can follow my podcast, The Zillennial Canon, on wherever you listen to pods, Spotify, Apple, wherever. Also, the Aggressively OK podcast, also on there. Same thing, Spotify, Apple, wherever you pod. And it was a pleasure coming on. I had a blast. So, yeah, definitely. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you, sir. And I endorse Zillennial Canon. It's a very fun show that you guys do.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. It's just bullshit each week, so we're glad that anyone listens and has fun with it.
Same thing here. You just heard it. It's all this bullshit.
They're professors of bullshit. Yeah.
And also, if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDVpod, where you post a bunch of our stuff, the questionnaires that you all contribute to. And also, you can send emails, doubleedgedhillbill@gmail.com for maybe longer pieces of feedback. And, what helps us out is if you aren't maybe a patron, maybe just buying some of our merch over at the ESO TeePublic store, where, you can get a mug or a face mask, anything like that. That helps us out, for sure. We would recommend it.
Buy our merch!
Of course, yes, buy our merch. Of course, yes. If you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy, and I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com.
And you can also find me on Twitter or Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM_or ADAM. Follow me. I'll accept your request. And I'll share whatever you want me to share. And also, I want to say to everybody, we were talking about Disney movies today, and the whole idea is that every man can be a hero. And I think that's a very important lesson to take to heart. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're doing, you mean something to somebody. You are a hero to somebody. And sort of believe that about yourself and believe that about everybody you met. Everybody's going through something, but everybody is important to somebody else. Just be kind to each other and respect everybody's personal journey.
Wow, what an inspirational bit. If you want more inspirational bits, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. I love that I just went straight into a plug. I'm such a shy street piece of shit.
Motherfucker.
My jaw dropped. I was like, wow, how smooth was that?
If you're listening on the ESO network, when I listen to the other great shows that are on there, or you can also dig into our archives over on the Podbean channel for all sorts of stuff, and also rate, review, or just share the show around and give us some more visibility. And, we also want to thank everybody out there because we recently passed 10,000 downloads. That might be small potatoes to a lot of bigger podcasts, but we've always been a small show, and we appreciate our consistent group of following, and we really appreciate it. If you just listen to either just to this show or any at least one other episode or something like that, we appreciate even just one listen to the show.
Yeah, man, that's a big fucking deal, and it means the world to me, and as I know it does to you, Thomas, as well. We are a small show. I like being sort of on the fringe. I like being something that's discoverable, and I appreciate you for it, and I appreciate our listeners for it, and I'm even proud of myself for it that we've never really changed. We've been the same since day one. We've kept the same format, the same banter, everything, and the fact that it has even 100 listeners means the world to us. But 10,000 downloads, holy shit, man. I mean, top of the world.
At the same time, we would love to sell out. Please help us sell out. We really want to sell out so much.
I say something that I feel is meaningful, and you're you're the consummate salesman. You son of a bitch, you. You gotta do it. He meant something really good, but by the way, go to TeePublic.
Oh, for sure. But, Adam, it's time to finally end this episode. And before we end every show, we pick our movies for next week, where Adam has, in this case, 2 good choices for the next topic. I have 2 bad. And we decided, this person who passed a few weeks ago, we wanted to do an episode about him, and we had to, work some scheduling stuff, and we want to finally do it. We both are pretty big fans of Cloris Leachman, will be our subject for next week. And so you have 2 good ones. You've assigned number between 1 and 10 for Adam, and I have 2 bad ones. And one person will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 for our good and bad choices. And usually when you have a guest like Adam 2, they are the ones that do that. So for Adam's good choices, Adam 2, pick number between 1 and 10.
Oh, 7. That's my lucky number.
All right. Well, at number 8, I have the Academy Award-winning Cloris Leachman and The Last Picture Show.
Oh, wow. Great. I'm genuinely great. I love that movie. Very great movie.
It's a fantastic film. Yeah, it's completely under.
Another one I just saw for the first time over quarantine, and I loved it.
It's so good. And at number 1, I have not only my personal favorite Cloris Leachman performance, but also my personal favorite horror / comedy of all time is Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're saving that for an eventual Mel Brooks episode.
We
at
are.
Some point. Yeah.
I mean, it fits so perfectly. I mean, she's just phenomenal in the film.
Phenomenal. Yeah. But all right, so now for my 2 bad choices, Adam 2. Number between 1 and 10.
Let's go 3.
All right. At number 2, I had one of the more infamous bombs of all time that I guess not a lot of people have seen because it was a pretty big bomb, and she's one of many celebrities in this film. I have Oogie Loves in the Big Balloon Adventure.
Whoa! Oh no! Is that even available anywhere?
It's available. I checked streaming sites. I made sure it was available somewhere.
Great. All right.
Wow. What a
Jesus
man. Christ.
Yeah. What was your other one?
Over on the other side, at number 7, I had the Beverly Hillbillies.
Oh, either way. Shit. Well, no. I'd much rather.
Beverly Hillbillies would probably just forgettable. We're talking Oogie Loves next time.
God damn. Okay.
I love, once again, another great double feature of The Last Picture Show and the Oogie Loves movie.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God. That seems like the most chaotic shit I've ever heard of.
That's what you get with our show is chaotic shit.
What have I done?
It's fine. You're not to blame here. It's us. We're awful monsters here. We're the true monsters, and you are the man. That's the big Hunchback twist of this whole thing.
Well, I will definitely be tuning into that episode because I am excited to see how that even just transition wise, how that transpires.
Yeah, I haven't met the breakdown. There's no question.
Well, until next time, everybody. This has been a long one, but we appreciate it. And good night, and wish upon a star, kids.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything poignant. Tom's going to fuck it up. So good night.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.